Dr. Guy Consolmagno is a research astronomer, and he was appointed by Pope Francis as director of the Vatican Observatory in 2015. He serves also as curator of the Vatican Meteorite collection, which is pretty extensive, I believe. In more homely terms, Brother Guy is sometimes referred to as l'astronomo del Papa, the Pope's astronomer. And he is a member of the Society of Jesus and also highly regarded as a philosopher and theologian. I could detain you for a long time listing his many scientific accomplishments and awards. They're considerable and include the Carl Sagan Medal for Outstanding Communication by an active planetary scientist to the general public. I think, however, Dr. Consolmagno would rather be given the time to speak than listen in advance to his obituary. His deep belief that science and religion need to work alongside one another as friends, not foes, resonates deeply with the aims of Grasping the Nettle. And it is at the invitation of Grasping the Nettle that Dr. Consolmagno is in Scotland on this visit. He's been in Scotland before. Grasping the Nettle is a national and interdenominational initiative. It's supported by leaders in the major denominations in Scotland. And its chief aim has been to promote informed and friendly dialogue on the subject of science and God. And we know that's a relationship that some would still urge us to consign to the dustbin of discredited partnerships, claiming that science alone offers a reliable route to truth, a privileged highway that has no place for religious perspectives. You may have read the piece in yesterday's Herald by a distinguished journalist, but proclaiming again the death of God in Western Europe and the response, the very considered response of Stuart Mitchell in suggesting a different perspective. It's our belief that only a small minority, in fact, of people subscribe to that highly exclusivist view, and that the great majority of folk understand that there's so much more to explore. Many are keen to do so, intuitively grasping the truth of Jonathan Lord Sachs, the former chief rabbi's affirmation that science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts them together again to see what they mean, and neither is dispensable. Grasping the Nettle invites people across the country to journey with us as we explore the subject of God and science. We seek to assist people in Scotland and beyond to make an informed choice when considering the God question. And who better to guide us in this enterprise than someone who is both an astronomer and a priest, a scientist and a man of faith. Dr. Consolmagno's visit to Scotland at this time is part of the Grasping the Nettle journey, and we are honoured and delighted to have him with us. As I've already mentioned, his visit has been making news. It was referred to in the letter that I mentioned, but almost every Sunday newspaper in Scotland highlighted this week's programme with Grasping the Nettle. Some of you will have read in today's Times the Thunderer piece by our own Ian Morris, an effective piece. We're also lending Brother Guy to the Royal Philosophical Society this evening and the Scottish Institute of Physics tomorrow. The Royal Philosophical Society meeting tonight is open to all, so if you have a free evening, you'll be most welcome to attend. It will be held in the John Anderson building of the University of Strathclyde, beginning at 7:30 p.m. I'm told to advise that it's liable to be busy, so if you are able to come along, be early. And let me also mention that tomorrow evening on the 9 programme on BBC the BBC's Scotland channel, Dr. Consolmagno will be interviewed live, so it's worthwhile tuning in to that tomorrow evening. Well, enough from me. I think Stuart mentioned that some photographs are being taken of the event and the talk is being filmed with the cameras focused on the speaker. But if anyone present doesn't wish to be seen, even in the background, do mention that to one of the team.
What the topics tonight and tomorrow?
Oh, the topics tonight and tomorrow. I should have.
History of science.
History of science. Tomorrow.
They're all vaguely in that exercise.
They're all in the area of history of science. Well, while Brother Guy is thinking about that and deciding what he's going to speak on tonight, so just to say that if anyone present doesn't wish to be seen, even in the background, mention it to one of the team wearing the GTN badge, and of course they'll respect your wishes. Following the talks, there'll be a brief opportunity for Q&A with proceedings ending at, or even shortly before, 4 p.m. So, will you please join with me now in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Consolmagno as he addresses the topic, Adventures of a Vatican Astronomer.
Thank you. I did just look it up. The talk tonight is Why Do We Look Up? It looks into the motivations for why we do science. The ones tomorrow and the next night are a look at cosmology, past and present. And then on Saturday at the Grasping the Nettle program, I'll be talking about purpose in the universe. Thank you for reminding me. The biggest telescope in the world right now is in Hawaii. And about 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to use this telescope with a team of astronomers who were interested in observing the small faint objects out beyond Neptune, trans-Neptunian objects. Now, the biggest telescope in the world is on an island that has a mountain that is at 5,000 meters. And because there's not much air there, you're not actually, if you only have one night, you don't actually go up the mountain. So this is a picture of what the base camp was like 10 years ago in the little town called Waimea in Hawaii. You can see the mountain off in the distance, but you're actually down at about 2,000 feet in a nice little village, and you could walk across the parking lot to get to a McDonald's. It's very convenient. You work inside in this building, and these are my two collaborators, Bill Romanish and Steve Tegler, and you talk over the internet, basically, to the people up there. So we had our program, we had one night on the telescope. We flew out from America to Hawaii, drove up, got settled into this area. Steve is talking over the net to the people, they actually running the telescope on the top of the mountain. And they told us, we're not opening tonight, it's snowing up here. In Hawaii, it's snowing, but that's what happens at 5,000 meters. We drew straws to see who was going to stay up all night in case the weather cleared. It didn't. And Steve and I actually got to go to bed. So I went straight to bed, woke up the next morning, and I realized it's a Sunday morning. And I'm a good Catholic boy, but I'm not a priest, I'm a brother. I'm not ordained. That means I can't just roll out of bed and say Mass for myself. I've got to find a church. And I figure, well, if the town is big enough to have the franchise of fast food, probably it has some of the church franchises as well. So I look up in the internet, and sure enough, there's a nice Catholic church right in town called Ascension Catholic Parish. Got these pictures off the internet. But this is Hawaii, and half the people in church at any given moment are going to be strangers. They're going to be tourists. The pastor got up and said, do we have any visitors here? And of course, all these people. And where are you from? California, oh, welcome. And where are you from? From Scotland, that's marvelous. And where are you from? From Ohio, wonderful. I was the last one up. And they said, and sir, where are you from? And I go, well, I'm an observer from the Vatican. Why does the Vatican have astronomical observers? That's the first question that I get asked a lot. And so in order to give you a sense of what we do and why we're there, I've got a little 4-minute film that is narrated by somebody who can do the job much better than I can. Both science and religion are conversations about the universe. They're ways of learning how we interact with this universe. It's not simply a question of is there a God, but there is a God, now what do we do? It's not just a question of there are a bunch of stars, but rather, why are there stars? How do they work? How does that tell us how things work here on Earth? The interaction that I see in my own life is that religion gives me the reason to do the science.
Back in the papacy before Francis was Benedict, and one of his lines in a final elocution to the fathers of the general congregation was, "Go to the frontiers." Well, there isn't much more frontier than 3.7 billion years away.
The first official interest of the Church for astronomy started in 1582 with the reform of the calendar. Then in 1891, Pope Leo XIII wanted to have an observatory to show that the Church is not against science, but the Church promotes good science.
They start out by having telescopes on the Tower of the Winds, and then on the walls surrounding the Vatican, as the city lights grow, and as the Italian government gives them back the territory out in Castel Gandolfo. In the 30s, they build new telescopes on the roof of the Papal Palace in Castel Gandolfo, best telescopes of their era in the 1930s. By the 1980s, light pollution makes those telescopes unusable, so we build a new telescope in the dark skies of Arizona.
I'm Father Jean-Baptiste Kikwaya Eluo. I'm working in 3 projects. The first one is NEOS, Near Earth Object. So what I'm doing with NEOS is just observe them using our modern telescope VAT. The second project is meteors. I worked on a very faint meteors, what we call shooting stars. And the third project is set fireball network. They will have 4 cameras here around Tucson so that actually we can monitor any fireball getting into the Earth atmosphere in the region.
This telescope, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, it was the first of the new technology telescopes that has been considered pretty much the norm now in developing telescopes. With the advance of computer technology, we have the capability of bringing that advanced technology directly into our telescope. So it's an expandable, it's almost like it's a living machine, so it can grow as technology grows.
It is still very important to maintain scientific research in the Vatican, simply because there is still a lot of confusion about this relationship between science and faith. We are not out here trying to prove the existence of God by looking through a telescope. That's not what we're doing. But we can say that if we want to obtain any reasonable results looking through that telescope, we need to do it embracing a certain work ethics that is, in fact, the same work ethics that the Bible itself tells us through commandments and through the Gospels to embrace.
Human beings look at the stars and wonder. They want to know, what is that? What is that about? How do I fit in? They hear about the moon landing and they want to know, what was that like? If we're part of the human race, we're part of the race that went to the moon. We're part of the species that looked at the stars and wondered, what the heck are those things? Looking at the sky reminds you that there's more to the universe than what's for lunch. What's more, if you believe in a universe that God so loved that he sent his son, then not only are you going to want to study the universe because it's kind of cool, it's an act of worship. It's an act of getting closer to the Creator and getting closer to a universe, as St. Athanasius said 1,500 years ago, was cleansed and quickened by the Incarnation. Then, doing science is an act of worship. So I want to let you know a little bit about the Vatican itself and what it means to be an astronomer at the Vatican. I went online to find out, if there was a good slide to show you the Vatican. And this one tells you the Vatican is actually the Antichrist system, not just the Antichrist, but the system. And that under the Vatican are the Jesuits who run everything. I'm happy to hear that. Including the Illuminati, the international bankers, the mafia, the Masons, Opus Dei. It's all there. This is marvelous. Don't I wish? Another diagram just basically said, oh yeah, there's congregations and secretariats and tribunals and committees and councils, and I can't keep them straight. What I do know is that the Vatican, there's actually two parallel Vaticans. There is the side that runs the church, and there is the side that runs the Vatican city-state, which is an independent country, smallest in the world. And one of the reasons that the Vatican had an observatory in 1891 was to get international recognition as being a national observatory different from the Italian National Observatory. Once a year, the Pope will gather the heads of all the different departments on a Christmas gathering. You can tell it's Christmas time there. And you'll notice there's not a whole lot of women in that room. There are actually two the last time I was there, but one of them was a very important person, the woman who runs the Vatican museums, and 80% of the budget of the Vatican city-state is proceeds from the museums. So she carries a lot of weight. We're all given assigned seating, and I don't rate to be a cardinal to be in the front row. I don't rate to be a bishop to be in the second row. But if you look way in the back, that's me, in the very last row, but I'm in the room. Astronomy is an integral part of the Vatican city-state. And that means that we get involved in lots of things you might not otherwise. This is a very, very tiny letter. Let me just pull up. I got a letter about 1.5 years ago. Basically, the Vatican at the UN in Vienna were asking the observatory if we could hold a workshop to announce the 50th anniversary of the peaceful uses of outer space. They're going to have a big meeting in Vienna. They wanted to have a workshop ahead of time, and we said, sure, we'd give them, so we basically put together this program. About a month before the workshop, I said, do you want any scientists at this workshop? I happen to know people who work in outer space, who work with asteroids and the like. Oh yeah, sure. But on a month's notice, who am I going to get to pay their own way to come to Rome? So I invited 8 of my friends, and they all said yes. Because who doesn't want to come to Rome? And they all got to meet the Pope, which was great fun. Well, after that, they said, okay, you had the workshop, we discussed the peaceful uses of outer space, we're ready for our big meeting in Vienna. Of course you're coming to that. Well, I've got some science I need you. Well, of course you're coming to that. Well, I really have other things. And then I got a letter from the Secretary of State telling me that I was going to be the one leading the Vatican delegation to this UN meeting on the peaceful uses of outer space, so I'd better go there. So I went there. Now, when I was in high school, I don't know if you do this in Britain, but when I was in high school, we had a thing called Model United Nations, where all the high school kids show up and pretend to be from different countries. I did that when I was in high school. Here I am now doing the real thing. But what I didn't realize is the way these meetings work is they had 80 nations there, or maybe 90 nations. And everybody had 7 minutes to get up and read a statement. And so I showed up and they handed me the statement to read, and I edited it down for 7 minutes. And basically what they wanted me to say was, peace is good, space is good. And then the next person would get up and go, space is good, peace is good. And we did this for 2 days, and the Vatican being not a full member, but an observer member, I was one of the last ones to get up and say, space is good, peace is good. For all of this, I had to travel to Vienna. It seems to be the kind of thing that is stating the obvious. 1 week before this meeting, President Trump had announced the idea of forming a space force in outer space, putting the military in outer space. And therefore, having an American who was representing the Holy See saying peace is good, space is good, became controversial. And there I am being quoted, reading the thing that they had me, had written for me. Sometimes it's important to state the obvious, because sometimes we forget the obvious. Obvious things like the universe is God's creation. Since the beginning of time, God has expressed himself in the things that are made. And that's not me, that's St. Paul, letter to the Romans, chapter 1, verse. There's some Protestant here who can tell me the right verse, I don't remember. Doing science is, like the guy in the movie said, an act of worship. The hardest thing I have is to explain to myself, why would anybody think there was a conflict? Because in my life, I've never experienced the conflict. It was, the priests and nuns when I was growing up who taught me science. And when people now tell me, oh, isn't there a conflict? How do you what's to reconcile? In 1993, soon after I became a Jesuit, I was ordered under obedience. I had to take 3 vows as a Jesuit brother: poverty, chastity, obedience. Poverty, I was used to. I'd been a grad student. Chastity, I was used to. I'd been a grad student. Obedience, I was not used to, being a grad student. But under obedience, without them even asking me, I was told I had to go live in this palace, look at that ugly blue lake, eat that terrible Italian food. Under obedience, what could I do but accept? And so I wound up living in this marvelous village with a papal palace that dates from the 1590s, but has a telescope on the roof. A lot of people are not aware that the Vatican Observatory exists, but that's just because you haven't read the literature. If you've ever read the Da Vinci Code, there we are in the Da Vinci Code. I looked up, I actually haven't read the whole book, I've just read the one part that talks about the Vatican Observatory. When Aaron Garosa, who apparently is either the hero or the villain, I'm not sure which, gets out of the car at the Vatican Observatory, a young Jesuit priest hurries out and greets him. Bishop, welcome. I am Father Mangano. Is that kind of like Consolmagno? I'm an astronomer here. Oh, good for you, says Aaron Garosa. He grumbles his hello, follows his host into the castle's foyer, a wide open space whose decor was a graceless blend of Renaissance art and astronomy images. Well, this is the actual foyer. No Renaissance art, no graceless blend, but never mind. Following his escort up the wide travertine marble staircase. Travertine is marble, but never mind. He's being paid by the word, I guess. Aaron Garosa saw signs for conference centers, science lecture halls, tourist information services. This is actually the staircase up to our quarters. Travertine marble, I don't think so. The top floor was a wide, lushly appointed, led in only one direction toward a huge set of oak doors with the brass sign, Biblioteca Astronomica. Well, this was actually the door to the Vatican Library, Astronomical Library. He'd heard of this place, the Vatican's Astronomy Library, rumored to contain more than 25,000 volumes, that's true, including rare works of Copernicus, true, Galileo, true, Kepler, true, Newton, true, and Secchi? How many people here have ever heard of Secchi? Actually, we do have rare books by Secchi, and Secchi was a phenomenally wonderful Italian astronomer. The irony is that his name is not mentioned in the Italian translation of this book. Never mind. Allegedly, it was also the place in which the Pope's highest officers held private meetings, meetings they preferred not to hold within the walls of Vatican. Why would you not have these meetings within the walls of Vatican City? It never quite. But here's the library. It's not quite as lush as it looks. And the only people who ever held meetings there were the summer school students, the undergraduates and grad students who were there for 4 weeks to learn astrophysics. Which is to say that a lot of popular ideas about science and religion are not only not true, but about the Vatican itself isn't true. The reason there's a Vatican Observatory dates to Pope Leo XIII, 1891, 126 years ago, where he wrote, "We established it so that everyone might see clearly that the church and pastors are not opposed to true and solid science, human or divine, but that they embrace it, encourage it, and promote it with the fullest possible devotion." 1891 is the key point here. That was at a time when Italy was still claiming that they owned the Vatican, that the Vatican was not independent. That wouldn't be settled till 1929. 1891 is also the end of the Victorian era, which was the time when the war between science and religion was getting invented. Before then, it didn't exist. The Galileo myth was invented by people in the 19th. I mean, there was a conflict between Galileo and the church, but it wasn't the conflict that you think it was. The church screwed up with Galileo, but it wasn't the screw up that you think it was. And this, I don't have time to do the whole Galileo talk. Look it up. Buy my book. Why was it in the 19th century that there was somebody out there who wanted to promote the myth between science, of a war between science and religion? That's another talk well worth looking into. But if you read what people were saying in the 19th century who wanted to promote this war, one thing you see over and over again is that modern science through evolution, which is a perfectly wonderful theory about biology, wonderful description of how things change, but people were taking the theory of evolution as an excuse, not just for social Darwinism. I'm rich and you're poor, and that must be the natural order of things, therefore there's no point in helping the poor. But actually using it as an excuse for eugenics, as an excuse to sterilize poor people, sometimes against their will, so that the world would be full of only good people, which is to say, of course, people who look like you and me, not people who look like those, except it wouldn't even be me, because in America, it was used to try to keep people with vowels at the end of their names, like Consolmagno, out of America. The war between science and religion has its basis in a total misunderstanding of evolution and a promotion of eugenics, which led to its logical conclusion in the death camps of Nazi Germany. And that's something to remember. No matter which side of that war you think you're on, it's got a very, very tarnished background. But back to my own adventures at the Vatican Observatory. When I arrived there, this was where our headquarters was. We moved out in 2009, but before then we lived in this palace. And this was where the Pope lived. The area circled in blue were the Pope's apartments, and my office was right above. You were looking at the one guy who could claim in the Catholic Church to be above the Pope. And out my window of my bedroom, I could see the Pope giving his daily audiences. This is actually a picture I took with my camera out my bedroom as the Pope was giving an audience. It sounds great living in a palace. Actually, a building built in 1590 doesn't have really good plumbing, doesn't have good central heating. It certainly was not built with the internet in mind. So in 2009, we moved to a much more modern building, which was built in 1632, but which was completely gutted and refurbished for our purposes. The ground floor is now the offices where the Vatican Observatory has, among other things, one of the largest meteorite collections in the world, one of the great libraries, even if it doesn't have the comfy chairs that they talk about, and also all of the photographic plates for the last 125 years of the sky, so that you could compare an observation of the sky now and see what did those stars look like in 1922 or 1892. It's a marvelous place to do work. And in order to dedicate it, the Pope at the time, Pope Benedict, came and he's holding one of my meteorites in his hand. That's my field, meteoritics. That's actually a meteorite from Mars. And he's able to, this picture ran on the front page of the L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican newspaper. I sent a copy to my mom. I said, Mom, I'm on the front page. Can you see me in this picture? That black thing, that's me. And if you don't believe me, that's the guy taking the picture from the other direction. I've had the privilege of getting to know 3 popes at the time I was there, John Paul II, and Pope Benedict, and Pope Francis. They're all wonderful people. I was really impressed with all of them. But I have to say of the 3, the one who surprised me the most was Benedict. Because when he was in public, he would kind of lecture at people like he was a German professor, because he was a German professor. But when you got to meet him one-on-one, he was witty and sharp and interested and asked great questions like, how do you know this rock is from Mars? And since there's a question probably in the back of your head, it's number 1, its chemistry is full of oxide minerals, which you don't find in ordinary meteorites. Number 2, all the meteorites are 4.5 billion years old, except these, which are only 1 billion years old. And the larger the body, the younger the rocks. Even the moon only has rocks as young as 3 billion years old. If this has a rock that's 1 billion years old, it must come from a place bigger than Mars, bigger than the moon. Mars is the only candidate. And finally, in some of these rocks, we have actually determined that there are tiny bubbles of gas, and the composition of that gas exactly matches the gas that our landers on Mars have measured in the atmosphere of Mars. So either this came from Mars or it came from another planet that's exactly like Mars, which we haven't found yet. The other great thing is that he's got a wicked sense of humor. As he was, shaking my hand at the very end going through there, he noticed my MIT ring. The tradition in America is when you graduate from a university, you get a ring. And most of the rings have big jewels in them, but the MIT ring doesn't. It just has a metal engraving of a beaver, because the beaver is the engineer of the animal world, and the MIT graduate is the animal of the engineering world. And so he wanted to take a look at my ring, and I took the picture, and now I say, here's the Pope kissing my ring. It does look like a bishop's ring from a distance. And I actually have had people try to kiss the, no, don't do that. I'm not even a priest, I'm a brother. We also had this Argentinian chemist show up. He brought his own white lab coat, which is very handy. And we're looking at a meteorite that came from Argentina. We hold meetings now. I mean, our goal is just to do good science and show people we're doing good science, and that's good enough. Because we want to show the world, and oftentimes the world we need to show is not the world of the scientists, because they already know about our faith and their faith, but to show the people in the pews that the church is actively supporting astronomy. And this was at a meeting of Nobel Prize winners acting and working on black holes, singularities, and it was for the anniversary of the 50th year following the death of Father Georges Lemaitre, the Belgian priest who also had 2 PhDs and who was the inventor of what's come to be known as the Big Bang Theory. A lot of people don't know that the guy who came up with the Big Bang Theory was a Catholic priest. He's not a Jesuit. He hated it when people would call him I'm not. It is possible to be smart and not be a Jesuit. Rare, but possible. In addition to that, though, as you saw in the movie, we have moved to Arizona, where we've built a telescope in a very dark and remote site, and it's a beautiful telescope. The story behind the telescope is kind of interesting. Typically, a telescope is designed to gather a lot of light and concentrate it into a point. And the typical telescope is like the one on the right because the focal point is very, very distant. You curve the telescope, you carve it into a parabola. And it's really hard to do that in a big slab of glass without breaking the glass. So you have the focus point way far away, which means you need a really long telescope, which means you need a really big dome, and all of that's got to be built on a mountaintop. Instead, there was a fellow at the University of Arizona who came up with the bright idea, take the glass and melt it in a big oven and spin the oven, and the glass will flow into a parabola, and the faster you spin it, the steeper the parabola, and then you can have a very squat telescope, which needs a much smaller building, and also, this way you wind up with a really beautifully formed mirror. He got enough money to build one mirror just to see if it would work. It worked great. He then went to the Vatican Observatory and said, if you build a telescope around the mirror, we can share the telescope. The great thing is the guy, the engineer who came up with this idea of the spin-cast mirrors, his name is Roger Angel. So 500 years from now, people are going to say, yeah, back in the 21st century, the Vatican had a telescope with a mirror made by an angel. Our goal at the Vatican Observatory is to be small but good, and we're halfway there. We've got 12 astronomers. We come from 6 nations, 4 continents, 8 languages, and that's just Paul Gabor from the Czech Republic who speaks 8 languages. Basically, we do not one big project, but every one of us comes from a different nation, a different university. We have people who have studied whatever they were interested in and then are recruited to come and join the observatory. To be part of the community, we've decided it's easiest if we're all members of the Jesuit order, and the Jesuits are all men, so that makes things a little restricted that way. So along with the dozen Jesuit astronomers, we have another dozen astronomers who are adjuncts, who have the full rights and privileges to use our facilities, but they can be lay people, they can be men or women, they can be priests. We even have an Opus Dei priest. I mean, you know, let's talk about being ecumenical there. The science we do is the science that is appealing and interesting to each of us individually. When I arrived at the observatory, the director said, here's your job, do good science. It doesn't matter whether the science is the kind of stuff that's being funded someplace else. It doesn't matter if the science is going to take 20 years to come to fruition. It doesn't matter if you don't have a result after 6 years and you're up for tenure, because we don't have tenure. So what we wind up doing is the kind of science that supports the work of our friends and colleagues. For instance, I was on that telescope project back in Hawaii. My colleagues, one was from the University of Oklahoma, another from Northern Arizona University. We were observing faint objects in the outer part of the solar system, looking for a pattern that we were able to see in the brighter, larger bits of those outer solar system objects. We had measured about 100 with our telescope, the VAT in Arizona, before we went to the big telescope to look if the pattern we saw continued on to fainter ones. Well, it took about 12 years to get enough data to confirm we were seeing a pattern. If you were looking for a grant from NASA, after 3 years you have to get a result, or else they're not going to give you your money anymore. But at the Vatican, we could look for 12 years because there's nobody telling us we can't. I talked about working in meteorites. The work that I do in my laboratory measures the physical properties of meteorites. The first time I showed this work at a meeting, one of the grand old men of the field came up and said, "Guy, why are you measuring meteorite densities? Nobody does that." And I go, "Yeah, that's why I'm doing it. Because I was enough of a theorist before I started working in the lab to know that I needed those numbers to work out my theories. And nobody else was measuring them because it takes years to get a thorough and complete set of all the different meteorite types and all the different densities. But there was nobody telling me I couldn't do it. It'll never win me the Nobel Prize. But 50 years from now, when everybody else's theory is obsolete, they're still going to be using my data. How did I get into this business? The first adventure was being born in the 50s, so that when I was 6 years old, Sputnik was being launched. And by the time I was in high school, people were landing on the moon. That was me with long hair. It was the 70s, what can I say? I was fascinated with science fiction. My best friend was at MIT. MIT had the world's largest collection of science fiction, so I joined the student body at MIT to read science fiction. That was the science fiction library. But oh yeah, I did a little bit of science while I was there, enough that I could go to Arizona and grow a beard along with my hair. This was the very first class of the very first department dedicated entirely to planetary sciences. The fellow with the relatively short hair and the Hawaiian shirt, Carl Allen, son of a Presbyterian minister, himself an elder in the Presbyterian Church, wound up being the curator of all the moon rocks at the Johnson Space Center. The fellow in front of him was the first person to survey the asteroid belt by their colors and spectra and work out different asteroid types. And I could go on and on naming the scientific achievements of all the different people in this group. I will point out, this is 1975, how many people of color do you see? None. How many women do you see? 1. There is in this group of 10, 1 Jew, 2 Catholics. That's what science looked like in 1975. That's not what science looks like today, which is not to say we've solved the problem, but at least we're making some progress on it. And I bring this up to remind you that science is done in the context of the society in which we live. Science is done by human beings, at least most of them are human beings. And human beings have to have a motivation behind why they do it, which leads to 2 final adventures I want to talk about. The first was when I was a postdoctoral fellow back at MIT, 30 years old at this point, walking across this bridge across the Charles River every day to go to a job in that skyscraper on the MIT campus. And I'd be asking myself, you know, why am I knocking myself out to write a scientific paper that 5 people are going to read and 2 of them are my enemies? And especially, why am I doing this when people are starving in the world? It's a variant of why does the Vatican have an observatory? Why am I spending my life doing astronomy? And I didn't have an answer. And I was 30 years old. Oh my gosh, I was old. I was no longer a kid. My life was being wasted away. And I thought, now is the time to quit and do something worthwhile. So I quit my job, I joined the US Peace Corps, and they sent me to Kenya. That was back when I was skinny and had red hair instead of gray hair. And I thought, here, finally, I can do something worthwhile. What I had forgotten was that I'm the kind of nerd who goes to MIT. I'm not the kind of person who likes adventures. And after about 3 weeks there, I was pretty homesick. And after about 6 weeks there, I was so homesick that I was physically ill. And the Peace Corps said, you want to go home anytime, tell us, and we'll put you on the next plane home. And I finally realized I was not cut out to be an adventurer. You know, I don't want to be a hobbit going off to get rid of the ring. I want to be a hobbit reading about somebody else going off getting rid of the ring. And I said, tomorrow I'm going to tell them, send me home. But here I am on the equator. I've got one last chance tonight to see the Southern Cross. I've always wanted to see the Southern Cross. I get my little book out, and sure enough, if I get up at 4 in the morning, here I am at the equator, the Southern Cross will be just above the horizon. So these were the stars at 4 in the morning, if you can see in the front. Yeah, off on the left, there is the Southern Cross, and I go, wow, that's really cool. I've always wanted to see it. Now I can go home. And then I turned around to go back to bed, and on the other side, I saw what we Americans call the Big Dipper, the Plow, whatever, the Ursa, and Arcturus, and the Summer Triangle, and Leo the Lion, and all of the stars that I had seen growing up in Michigan. And I said, why do I have to go home? I am home. Any place where I can see the stars, I know that I'm in the universe that is home. And so I stayed my 2 years. I wound up teaching first at a little high school where, you know, I had the kids building model spaceships. I took a little telescope up country, would show it to people and give talks, and everybody in the village would look through the telescope and go, wow, that's so cool. And everybody in the village would show up to my talks, and I'd explain, you know, what Voyager had seen at Jupiter. And they would want to know, what's that all about? How do people know that? How do you know those rocks come from Mars? Is there any way that I could take part in that? And that's when I realized why you do astronomy, even though people are starving, because we're not just well-fed cows wondering what's for lunch. Because we're human beings with souls that also have to be fed. We don't live by bread alone. I read that someplace. It's literally true. That's why they wanted to talk to an astronomer who had actually published papers, even though only 5 people had read those papers. It inspired me to go back and teach astronomy, and eventually to join the Jesuits, where I took vows as a Jesuit brother, thinking I'd be able to teach astronomy, but instead they made me go to, you know, live in that terrible palace and eat that terrible food. When I got to Castel Gandolfo and I discovered that there was a collection of 1,100 meteorites, rocks from space, I was in hog heaven. I could actually touch pieces of outer space. Well, where did these rocks come from? They came from a French nobleman who collected them the good old-fashioned way. He bought them. And then when he died, his widow donated them to the Vatican. But where do you get meteorites today? One of the best places is Antarctica. And so my final adventure is talking about 20 years ago when I was younger and crazier, being part of a 6-person team going off to the Antarctic plateau, living in tents, going and collecting every day meteorites that had landed on the ice, had been concentrated into a certain region by the motions of the ice. You notice, if you can see in the picture, it's mostly shiny ice, but in the front there's little bits of snow there. That's not snow sitting on the ice, that's a crevasse. You don't step there or you plummet and maybe break a leg or worse. But if you know where you're going, you can drive across the ice until you see something black, and you go up and you collect it, and then the team will look at it carefully, and later on they'll measure it back at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where my friend was the curator. This particular rock turns out to be a piece of the moon that had been chipped off the moon a few million years ago, flew around space for a while, and hit the Earth, as it happens in Antarctica, where we could pick it up because it was real easy to see because the rock was black and the ice was white. And so that's where I lived for 2 months, in that tent. You can see the sled to the left, where our food was kept, frozen food. You can see the weather station. I can tell you that it got to 20 below with the wind chill factor of 70 below. You can see the bucket that has chipped ice. We'd go out and chip the ice from behind the tent, due south. The wind always comes from the South Pole. And that's where you chip the ice to melt. And then you see the shovel next to it. Every morning you'd get up, put on all your clothes, drive the skidoo in the other direction downhill, look for a pile of snow, dig a hole in the snow, and hope you didn't forget the toilet paper. 6 weeks of that. I was reminded of Psalm 139. Lord, you've searched me and know me. You know when I sit down, when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me. If I say, surely the darkness will cover me and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as day. Well, of course, that was true in Antarctica. But that's not the adventure I want to talk about. To get to Antarctica, you go through Christchurch, New Zealand, and then you're stuck in these tents. And you're actually never alone. It's dangerous to be alone. So I was always in a tent with somebody else. And you just never talk about politics, religion, or sex, because there's no place to flee. They won't even allow married couples to go down there because the living is so intense that it's enough to destroy a marriage. And I never really even got to tell my stories about being at the Vatican. Plus, I wanted to see the Southern Cross again. And I know as an astronomer, the two things you do is you wait till it's dark and you look up. And here I was in Antarctica where it never got dark, not until February. And we spent all the time looking down, looking for meteorites. So I asked one of the old timers who'd been there before, what should I do? When you get back to New Zealand, he says, get a bed and breakfast at a place called Lake Tekapo, which is this really, really beautiful spot in the South Island. And the skies are phenomenally dark. It's actually a certified dark sky site now. And you can see the stars, and you can see the Southern Cross, and it was marvelous. I showed up there right after Christmas. Of course, it's summertime down there. And at the bed and breakfast where I was staying, there was a wonderful family. And one of the other families that was visiting and staying there was a German couple. And so I got to talk with them and try out my high school German, and that was fun. They went on their way back to Germany. And a few days later, the woman who runs the B&B said to me, would you like to go to church with us? This is the chapel in Lake Tekapo. The clergyman will come out from Christchurch once a week. 1 week it's Presbyterian, the next week it's Catholic, the next week it's Anglican. So you kind of change your religion depending on what week it is. The week I was there was going to be the Anglican, but that was fine. And then the woman says, so you could maybe help out, because I noticed with our other guests you speak German. The woman you probably read about is going to be here. You go, what woman? It turns out there is a different German couple visiting the Southern Alps. He stepped back to take a picture and fell to his death in front of her. She's 42 years old, alone on the other side of the world, speaks no English. And it's the weekend, they can't even get to the consulate till Monday. But Guy, you speak German and you're a Jesuit. Can you talk to her? I'm a brother. I can talk meteorites. What do I do? Well, I'd had enough training to know that actually you don't talk, you listen. And the Anglican priest had some good, things to start her talking about and thinking about. Where do I go with my life? What do I do next? What do I do now, step by step by step, starting to put her life back in order. But it made me come to realize the human side of being a scientist never goes away. The human fears and joys that come with doing science are also the fears and joys of life and death. In that we can never just be a scientist. We can never just be someone who's interested in rocks. We are part of a human family, which is why we do the science, and which gives us the best image of why we do the science. I end with this marvelous quote from Chesterton. The essence of pantheism was that nature was our mother, but the point of Christianity is that nature isn't our mother, nature is our sister. Nature was a solemn mother to worshippers of Isis or Cybele, or to the Wordsworth, or to Emerson. But to St. Francis, nature is a sister, and even a younger sister, a little dancing sister, to be laughed at as well as loved. We bring our humanity to the people we encounter, and we bring our love to the nature of which we are all siblings. And that's the greatest adventure of being a scientist. Thanks a whole lot for coming.